In this episode of the Exploring Information Security Podcast, what is the Ransomware Defense Initiative?
Computers now have primary control of critical functions.
Houston, recommend vector transfer.
Your go for APU shutdown on time.
Roger, go for deploy.
Nice to be in orbit.
Welcome to the Exploring Information Security Podcast, where you will learn, explore, and grow your security mindset. I'm your host, Timothy D. Block, and in this episode, we'll be exploring the Ransomware Defense Initiative. With me to do that is Ed Rojas, the creator of RDI. Show notes can be found at exploresec.com/EIS. You can support the podcast by donating. There's a donate button on the website. You can sign up for the newsletter. Feedback for the show is welcome at timothy.dblock@exploresec.com. You can also set me up on LinkedIn. If you're looking to connect on LinkedIn, make sure to say you're a listener, because I don't always accept invites. I get a lot of requests for a variety of different things, so make sure you let me know. You can rate the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. That really helps support the show as well and gives me some good feedback. So this is another great episode with Ed Rojas. He's been on a few different times very early on. Ed and I also used to do a podcast called the PVC Sec with a couple other people. But we're not here really to discuss that. We're here to talk about the Ransomware Defense Initiative, which is really just a questionnaire to kind of give you a understanding of what your security posture is at a certain point, and kind of helps you tie that back to certain attack techniques. It sounds like Ed put a lot of different work into it. This is just getting off the ground too, so you can definitely get in and really start trying to understand it. He's got a lot of really great content out there. He's about to release a new version if it hasn't already come out by the time this releases. We kind of talk about that a little bit, and he's got ideas for the future. So I think this can be a really valuable tool, and it's already being used globally with a bunch of different CISOs. So he's getting a lot of that feedback and putting it into the tool. But to me, it was a really great conversation around kind of getting a better understanding of where your organization is at. And that's one of the first things you should be doing when you go to an organization, especially at like a CISO or leadership level, is like, what do we have in place? And this kind of gives you that those questionnaires and that map and the visual, and even you can tie it back to like metrics and stuff about where you need to be from a maturity standpoint. And this then helps you have the conversation around, one, building out a roadmap where you need to go, but then two, going and talking to your leadership about the funding that you may need, you probably will need, and if you want to get to a certain point of maturity, this will help you with that. And I could totally see, as I mentioned to Ed, this could be something that insurance companies start picking up on and start using. So it's just that good. But let's go ahead and get into it.
Appreciate the time here, man. I saw so that you were doing this. I'm like, shit, let's see. Tim is interested in talking about RDI and stuff. So
yeah, I know. I'm always interested in people reaching out and asking me to do stuff. It's actually interesting enough that you mentioned this, because this was on my task list at work to dig into, because I think the CISO went to your talk at RSA.
No shit.
I was like, yeah, he sent the link and checked it out. And I actually looked at I did go briefly look at it. I was like, oh, that's Ed. Okay, I know Ed. So I was probably going to reach out at some point regardless, but you beat me to it. But
awesome.
I thought that was just, that's just kind of what the security community is, right? It's kind of, it's a small world, but I just, for your feedback is that my CISO was interested in it. Now, again, he's moved on to other stuff because he's a CISO, but this is definitely something I looked over and thought it was interesting. So like,
that's awesome.
Do it.
And what do you see up version 2.0 of that one?
Yeah.
I'm working on that. It looks, let me see if I can share my screen really quick, and then we can start whenever you want. Oh, I'm presenting them. Let me just share my screen here. So this is what it's looking like right now.
Nice.
And this is part of the conversation that we're going to talk, right? Some of the stuff is, for example, this is for Black Basta, right? Mm-hmm. So but anyway, it's going to look like this, right? It's a different, completely different look, and just working on that. So that's what's going to be the future, and it's I think it's going to kick ass, completely different. But
are you willing to share a screenshot for the blog post or the show notes?
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that.
Take a screenshot, and send it to me, and then I can put that up on the show notes. And
yeah.
This is what 2.0.
Yeah, exactly, and hopefully it'll come out sometime in July,
2024.
Yeah, in a couple of months. Yeah.
Cool.
This one, right? It looks similar, but what I did is I took the blog that I've created, right? But I'm putting it in there. So what I'm doing is I'm taking information from the CISA advisory.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it's Black Bastard, and I break it down into this thing. So these are the 2 attacking techniques that he uses, right? About Black Bastard.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just show you the CISA mitigations and how they apply to each of those attack techniques, right? And basically, there you can see which technique applies to which one. And let me see if I can move this.
Does that on toggle, the blue on toggle, mean that it applies to those?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So that means, yep, this mitigation applies to T1190. It doesn't apply to 1566, right? Where this one applies to both, right? So maybe I just switched that to green and gray or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
And here then it maps the CISA mitigations to which controls specifically it maps to. That way, if you're a CISO, now you have specifics, and we'll talk about this, right? Because right now the CISA mitigations are, right, install updates for operating systems, software, and firmware as soon as they are released. You and I, it makes sense, right? We read it and we're like, cool. But then we're like, what exactly does that mean? Right? I mean, and so RDI already identifies those controls. So it says, hey, to do install updates from CISA, you make sure that you have these controls: apply patches and updates, implement security policies, and do vulnerability scanning, right? Boom. It already identifies what are the 3 things that you got to focus on from a foundational, right? And so forth. And then it will automatically, once you do the assessment, the auto assessment, then you go to the other screen that I had shown before that shows you your maturity against Black Bastard. So that's what's coming up in the future.
So does it not right now show you like your current controls and compare it to that, or that's in the future?
No, it does. So the current one, it's really cool because it shows you answer the questions and it shows you in real life, right? In real time. Let me see what your current
short on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that can be useful for, especially because one of the things in my day job is paying attention to some of these techniques, and then so I can see where that's very useful to show, new techniques are coming out. Yeah. Here's how this applies to our current maturity, and then you can either push or bring up that we're kind of lacking in this.
Exactly. So that's basically what I'm trying to do here, right? So this is on the website. This is what it looks like right now. I was very happy, very proud of this. But I started working this week on the other look, and now I hate this look. I'm like, why did I come up with this? But this is actually really good. So the way that you use it, and again, like I said, we'll go through this if you want to during the stuff. But you go here and it gives you your 3 families, right? Because I'll explain what the 3 families are, and basically for each family you have different controls. Okay, so you start with the foundational, and the first control that you see is web application firewall. The first question is, have you deployed this control? If the answer is yes, then you answered 4 more questions. If the answer is no, you don't answer any questions. It's a gap. And if it's not sure, it marks it as an interesting control. You need to get more information about this control. And then you can move on to the next. But if you answer yes, Then you answer 4 questions. And like I said, this is out of order. So you start with, and these 4 questions, they basically align to the CMMI. So question 2, the question 2 is, do you have people, processes, and procedures to maintain this application, right? So that's CMMI level 1, right? And then you give it a value between 0 and 10. And depending on the value, you notice how it automatically calculates.
Yeah.
And then if you go to the next question, well, do you have all the complete documentation for this control, diagrams, configuration, etc., right? If you answer properly, again, right, it answers that question. Then you go to the next one. Do you have KPIs, right? Do you do continuous monitoring? Let's say that you say yes. So see how everything calculates? And now, do you have tools in place to maintain and update and everything automated? Usually the answer is going to be like a 6 or something like that. Yeah. So in real life, if you answer this properly, it tells you that your maturity for this control is 74%. Now, does that make sense? I don't know. What's your risk appetite, right? If your risk appetite is 75%, then you want to have 75% maturity. Then you're below that. But if you're okay with 70% maturity, then you're way ahead, right? And then the cool thing over here then is that as soon as you click next, it starts to calculate these things in real life. And it starts to tell you, well, your current risk right now, because you only have one control.
Yeah.
And then it maps that control to each of the techniques. So, 1189 has WAF, 1190 also has web application firewall. So it tells you which techniques this control helps defend against. And like I said, you answer that for everything, and then all the controls. So you see now it came to control number 2 and so forth. So that's what it's done. So it's automated, and it's pretty cool. So at the end of the day, right, you come up with a self-assessment. A CISO was using it, he says, Ed, I don't think this is working because I used it, and he gave me a very high maturity score for a control that I don't think is that mature. And I'm like, well, how did you answer these questions? Do you give yourself very high grades? If you do, right, then yeah, your maturity.
These things are always like you have to answer them honestly, because I feel like this is similar to what I was doing in application security with the OWASP SAM. Exactly. And they have something similar, right, where they have a spreadsheet, but then you answer them. Yeah. And then it calculates everything, and it shows you your weak areas. It kind of helps you build out a roadmap. So does this do you like log into it, or does it give you a spreadsheet with all this information? Like, what's the output from it?
Right now, it just prints a PDF with it. But the version 2, I'm going to add a login stuff, and you can download in PowerPoint or in Excel, and then there's going to be a pay for version that gives you more stuff, but again, be able to measure against current ransomware. So Black Basta is the new ransomware, and it's for healthcare, and your healthcare, you want to find out how well you're doing against that, right? So you register and you use this application, you answer all those questions, and it gives you all those reports. In the future, I'm working with my brother-in-law, who's been a lot of experience with AI and writing LLMs and all that stuff. And we're going to be including the capability of analyzing your documentations, helping you. So when I do this with a client, right, and we go through those questions, I'm going to ask, are you sure that's that you're going to give yourself a 7 out of 10? Because do you have this document? Do you have this? Do you have this? So I want to put that as part of AI, right? So that you can do a self-assessment, assisted self-assessment, as if you had a expert consultant right next to you. But that's like version 5.0. So we got to take baby steps. But that's where I'm getting into. And at that point, you can just create your own reports and help you do the assessment will be based on the type of information that you provide documentation to analyze as we will do it on a regular professional assessment. So, but that's, like I said, version 5.0. We'll see.
Cool.
But anyway.
Is that all cool to be in the podcast, by the way? Because we're already recording. I've already hit record. So.
Oh shit! All right, awesome.
Is that good? Are you okay with talking about that for future versions?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
No, so I just run these. I don't do any sort of intros. I do it all in post now. So.
I remember.
Yeah. So, I guess what was what started this? Like, what's the origin of the Ransomware Defensive Initiative?
Yeah. So let's talk about, you get Black Basta, right? And you're the CISO of a healthcare organization, and you hear, oh, Black Basta is hitting healthcare. So you start reading the CISA advisories, and it's a long PDF, right? And then all you're interested, you don't care about all the IOCs at this point. That's beyond. You go to what are the mitigations, right? And for Black Basta, CISA gives you, I believe, somewhere about 12 mitigations, right? And you start looking at that, and you saw the example, what I said, right? Implement the latest patches. Well, that's easy to do, right? But what controls do you need to have in place to do that? And so that's what drove me, because I started doing the research. I'm like, there's got to be a reason why ransomware is so effective. Ransomware is malware, right? Simple. The only between this ransomware and a virus or a worm, whatever, is that this ransomware will actually encrypt your data and hold it as hostage, where the other ones, they don't do that. But at the end, it uses the same techniques for any type of malware. So why is ransomware so effective? We've been in security for 30 years, right? And so what are we doing wrong? And I started doing the research, and I said, well, I want to identify a set of controls, right? That should be recommended, that everyone should have implemented. And if you have these controls implemented, you will be okay against ransomware. That's one thing that I wanted to do. The second thing is that every time that you talk or you read about ransomware, regardless of the name or the title of the article, it always assumes that you've already been breached. So the focus is always on how quickly do we recover, right? Do we have backup and restore procedures in place? Have we tested them? Do we have incident response plan? Do we test them, right? And all these things. Some of them starts going into implement multi-factor authentication and make sure you have network segmentation. And so I started thinking, like, all right, so most of the recommendations are for recovering. I haven't seen, I could count in the fingers in my hand the number of articles that actually focused on proactive, not on reactive security. So I wanted to go on the proactive. How do we detect and mitigate ransomware attacks as early as possible? So I started doing the research on ransomware, and you have, I forgot the name of the company right now, but they presented at RSA 2 years ago, the ransomware kill chain, where they showed the 3 phases of the ransomware kill chain, right? The access phase, the exfiltration phase, and then the encryption phase. Well, everything, all the recommendations focused on recovering from after the encryption, but very few focused on the detecting during or before the exfiltration phase. So I started doing the research on that. And you can do this exercise yourself. Do a Google. How to prevent being a ransomware victim. Very simple. You're going to get gazillions of Google stuff. Read any of them. Any of them. I challenge you to find one that focuses on preventative. They all are going to tell you the exact same recommendations, as I just mentioned. Backup, recover procedures, resiliency, offsite, storage, all that stuff. But never on detecting and mitigating. The other thing is also, you will never find, or I haven't located, a reference document that says, these are the controls that you need. So for example, at RSA, I made the question to the public there. It's like, how do we protect ourselves from phishing, right? Everyone says, hey, phishing is the big way that's being used to start ransomware attacks. So I ask you, Tim, give me one control that we can use against phishing.
Email security.
Okay, give me another control.
Security awareness training.
Perfect. Give me a third one.
Incident response.
But that's responsive. That's reactive.
Yeah.
We're talking about preemptive.
Preventative. Local. No local admin on computers.
Beautiful. Yeah. But you see how we start to struggle, right?
Mm-hmm.
RDI identifies 40 controls.
Oh, wow. 40
controls specific to phishing or technique 1566. Right? That all of a sudden, exactly all of a sudden, you're like, what? Right? And so that's what I wanted to do. My goal was to identify a set of controls that need to be implemented so that we can have the capability of detecting and mitigating ransomware attacks as early as possible. Right? And that was the goal of the Ransomware Defense Initiative, or RDI. And I did the research, and I came up with RDI, which you can find in rdishield.com. The first version of RDI was very basic and kind of manual. This version actually helps guide you through an automated process. So as you were saying before, for application security, you usually use an Excel spreadsheet, right, to do the assessment. It's the same idea here. It's only on a website, and it's automated for you. And if you go to rdishield.com, you go to the application. It's available there for free, and you can start answering questions for each of these controls. As you answer those questions, you will automatically get a maturity score for that specific control. You're going to be answering 4 questions for each control. It's the same 4 questions. And these 4 questions align, as I said before, to the CMMI levels 1 through 5 or 0 through 4, whichever one you prefer. And so as you answer these questions, you give yourself a scale of 0 through 10, and the application automatically calculates your maturity. And the more questions you answer for each control, right, it starts to collect all this information. And what it does at the end, as I said, right, for phishing, 40 controls. So by the time that you finish answering the questions for all of these controls, you will receive a report that tells you what's your current maturity level against phishing, right? From a proactive point of view. You're not going to have questions about backup or restore processes or incident response plan. You're going to have questions specific to being proactive. So for phishing, 2FA, right? A foundational 2FA controls. If you go into the more advanced, which we call advanced, because I'm very creative, then you have MFA. So let's take a step back then about RDI. So what I did is I identified, I believe it's about 82, 84 controls in total, right? RDI, during my research, and let me take another step back, sorry. During my research, reading CISA, reading about from Sophos, from Trend Micro, Kaspersky, all these companies, they always identify what is the initial attack vector for ransomware families, right? And it always identified as MITRE ATT&CK technique 1566 for phishing, or 1190 for external web applications, and or external remote services. I forgot which one that is. And so I went back to MITRE ATT&CK, and it turns out MITRE ATT&CK has a phase called initial phase, and in that MITRE initial phase, it identifies about 9 or 10 common techniques that are used to start any type of attack, any type of ransomware attack. I selected 7 of those 10 because 3 of them had to do with physical security, and I don't know about physical security, so I just focused on 7. And the 7 are phishing, drive-by compromise, external public-facing applications, external remote services, supply chain compromise, valid account, and trusted relations, right? Those are the 7. So every time that you read about any ransomware family and in the CISA advisories, it will tell you it starts with 2, 3, or 4 of those. Like, for example, Akita ransomware uses 4 techniques. Of those 7, it uses 4 techniques. So Akita is pretty powerful, right? Versatile. And so once I identified the 7 techniques that I wanted to focus on, I then went into MITRE Defend. And have you heard of MITRE Defend?
I have not heard of MITRE Defend. I've heard of MITRE ATT&CK.
Right. So MITRE Defend, it was pretty cool because the idea is exactly that, right? It's let's identify countermeasures, or what they call artifacts, against the MITRE ATT&CK common techniques, right? And so I did that. I started mapping all of the MITRE defense to each of the techniques, and that's how I started to create this this matrix, right, where I had identified techniques and all of the defense mechanisms that MITRE Defend identifies. When you look at MITRE Defend, it's very difficult to understand. They talk about some controls that are like, I'm making this up, user geolocation behavioral pattern, something like that. And I'm like, what does that mean? How do you eat this thing, right? I don't understand it. But the information is there. So I did the research, and I started to identify controls that met the requirements that MITRE Defense says should have. And that's where you come up with web application firewall, with 2-factor authentication, and things like that. So I ended up creating this matrix, this table that had about 84 something controls, and I was happy, right? And I showed it to some of my friends, and they and because I had the imposter syndrome, I'm like, is this, after you finish a lot of time working on something, then you finish, you're like, is this useful? I mean, am I right? Right? Everyone gets that feeling. And so I went with my network of friends, contacts, and they all said, "Oh, this is pretty good. This is pretty good. Go ahead. No, you're not going to be. Nobody's going to laugh at you." And I'm like, "Okay, good." And so then I validated it with about 100 or so CISOs in the States, Latin America, and Europe, and I took a lot of the information they provided and to make it better. So one of the suggestions was, Ed, this is really good, but holy crap, there's too many controls in here. I don't even know where to start. So they're like, any chance we can group them so we can consume this information? And I thought that was a great idea. So I started then doing more research, and I ended up breaking RDI into 3 families, and I called it foundational, advanced, and elite, right? And foundational controls, this is pretty cool. Foundational controls, I started thinking from a small company perspective, right? The small companies, they don't have $100,000 laying around to implement all these controls that they're told you have to have, right? And so I focus on what are the controls that smaller companies can have, and from the get-go, right? And I remember speaking with Adrian Sanabria, for example, when I used to do the Tactical Edge events, virtual events. He came on one of my events, and he said a lot of the controls already built in with the operating system. And that always was in the back of my mind. And sure enough, right? So one of the foundational controls is antivirus, anti-malware, right? It's already built in with Microsoft. Small companies don't have to buy it. It's already there. Create policies and procedures, right? We still laugh at that recommendation, but how many places have we gone? I've gone to many places where they say that they do have them, right? And then I don't have access to them because HR decided that only employees have access to it, but third-party contractors don't have access to it. And I'm like, that's not a company secret, right? That should be publicly available, or your policies. Some don't even have it. Some have templates, right? And this day and age. So those are things that small companies can do. And as they start to grow, right, role-based access control, right? You don't have to spend a lot of money. You can hire somebody like you or I, the independent consultants, and you don't have to pay a lot of money. You don't have to pay the money that you pay for the Big Four to work with you. And so you have things like that, two-factor authentication, role-based access control. And that's for the smaller companies, to just get the foundational right. As you start to grow, then continue looking at the foundational. Other controls in foundational is security awareness, right? You know this better than anybody else. Security awareness will help you. It's a really good proactive approach to deal with all techniques, every single technique that is used to start a ransomware attack. It applies for every single one of them, right? So security awareness is not something difficult to implement. And it won't cost you a lot of money, especially if you're a small organization. But as you start to grow, then you start looking at other foundational 2FA, all of a sudden RBAC is not enough. So 2FA, you need to start authenticating users. You start to get a bigger, digital footprint. So now you start to have to do logging and monitoring of this stuff, right? So at that point, you start looking at some SIEM, stuff like that, anything that will give you. And there's a lot of utilities out there that are for free that you can actually implement for a small, almost medium-sized company, right? Again, you do invest some money on having a third-party company come in and do that, but it's affordable. We're not talking about implementing SOAR or implementing IAM or PAM, right? Now, as you start to grow, and now you're a medium-sized company, and you have focused on the foundational. You already have logging and monitoring. You have vulnerability and patch management in place, at least the beginnings of it. And you're growing. All of a sudden, 2FA becomes too difficult. You have too many. You have more people now, and it becomes too difficult to maintain. Well, now you're ready for MFA. Yeah. So MFA becomes part of your advanced. You're already building on top of the previous one. Yeah. And as you continue to grow, then you start looking at things like your network segmentation, right? That's more advanced. You start looking, again, IAM, PAM, those are more advanced. Once you have foundational pretty solid, and you have a good grasp of the advanced controls, as you keep growing as an organization, all of a sudden you start talking about zero trust, right? Only kind of special size organization will talk about zero trust, right? Your small and medium, they don't care about zero trust. But when you start talking about zero trust or digital transformation, it means, man, you're no longer medium. You're already in the major leagues, right? You're already, yeah, you're not a Fortune 500, but you're out there. And for elite, we start finding things like zero trust. And this is also one of the drivers that I wanted to do, is to give the CISOs some kind of, let's say, resource to talk to the vendors that just want to sell you anything, right? When you have the infamous vendor that comes in and says, hey, I have your solution for zero trust, right? Well, with RDI, you know that you build everything that's on foundational and advanced, it builds you to elite. So you have zero trust, right? So zero trust, you go step back. What do you need for zero trust? Do you have DLP implemented? Do you have network segmentation? Do you have IAM? Do you have PAM? Do you have SOAR? Because you need to be, at some point, you need to be, right, automated. All those that I just mentioned, they're all advanced controls. So you cannot do zero trust if you have a gap on these advanced controls. And then you do a step back from advanced and you're going foundational. Oh, do you have login and monitoring? Yes, I do. For everything? Are you sure? Which means, do I have a good asset management, asset inventory in place? Because if I do, then I know that I'm logging and monitoring everything. And logging and monitoring is foundational. Do I have a good vulnerability management system, right? Those are all foundational. So everything starts to build on top of the other. And that's one of the reasons also, like I said, why I decided to do this. Because you have one of these unscrupulous vendors come in and say, I have the zero trust solution for you. You can go and ask them, well, tell me what entails zero trust for you. And then take a look at the RDI or have it handy, and then say, well, but so your solution comes with network segmentation. How are we going to do that, right? And it basically helps you to filter all
I
this.
was going to say it helps you build those requirements for those vendors,
Exactly.
and I think that's a great, yeah.
Exactly. So it's a pretty cool. The more I started to use it, I realized, I'm like, oh crap, I can use this as a strategic tool, right? And everything. And that's when so when I was validating, this is a pretty cool story. When I was validating this, I was with a CISO from a large manufacturing company, and I was explaining to him. I said, well, here's the table, right? You have all the controls per family on the left, right? So you have all the controls on the left, and then each column. So imagine a matrix, right? So you have 8 columns. The first column is all the controls that I've identified, and the other 7 columns, each one is a technique. So you have T1133, T1566, T70, 1078, 1074, whatever it is. And then under each column, you're going to see either a blue box or a red box. Blue box identifies that the control is used for detection. And red box identifies that control is for mitigation. So for example, and it makes sense when you go on the website, you're going to see the table, what I'm talking about. So basically, it's like a matrix. If you select and attack a technique, let's say T1566 for phishing, and you go down that table, every time you see a blue box, you go to the left, and it identifies a control that applies to defend against attacks that start with that technique, right? If you see a blue box or red box, it identifies a control. And so I was explaining this to a CISO, and as I'm explaining to him, I said, all you have to do is just select the technique, go down the table, you see a blue box, go to the left, and it tells you what is the control. Keep going, you see another blue or red box, go to the left, and it identifies that's the control that you need implemented. And he said to me, Ed, I've already validated this. And I was like, okay, What do you mean you validated? So he told me the story that his company had been a victim of a ransomware attack a few months back. And they hired, that very well-known company that starts with an M. They hired them to come over and do the investigation, the report. And what they told them was that the attackers started the attack by taking over a valid user account on a copier machine that was connected to the network. Well, the CISO and his team, they didn't know there was a copier machine connected to the network, but there it was. And they were able to move laterally, and game over, right? They gain privileges and game over. And so the recommendation from this big company was, you need to implement an identity and access management program. If you would have had that, it could have identified that valid user account in that copier machine, right? Well, when you look at the technique 1074 for valid accounts, when you look at that technique on RDI and you go down that column, and every time you see a box, blue or red, it identifies the control. As you keep going down, you go into the advanced controls. There's a red box. You go to the left, IAM, right? So he goes, Ed, this big company came, I spent a lot of money, and they recommended IAM. Your RDI says you need IAM implemented to help you deal with technique 1078 valid user accounts. So he said it's validated. And I was like extremely happy. And so that's long story how RDI started, how it came to be where it is right now. And right now it's available, rdishield.com. It's free to use. Anybody can go in there. It's a self-assessment. Again, you have to be truthful when you answer the questions. I had a CISO tell me, I don't think that the algorithm is working, because he gave me a very high maturity level or result for a control that I know is not that mature. And I said, well, what assessment do you give yourself? If you give yourself all 9s, then you're going to have 95% maturity on that control. Garbage in, garbage out. It's the same with everything, right? So it's a self-assessment, but it needs to be a true, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and don't lie to yourself. The other thing, Tim, that people are using it, I get emails from CISOs. If you're a new CISO at an organization, right, you're starting a new job as a CISO, the first thing that you want to do is find out where you are. What does your cybersecurity program look like? What does your team look like, right? And a lot of the time, all these CISOs, they will probably have a big four, depending on the size of the company. They will probably have one of the big fours or another consulting firm to do the CSF assessment, right? Usually that's how you start, right? So a lot of CISOs are using this as a way to find out really quickly what is the cybersecurity program and how good are the people that they're going to be working with. So what they do is they set up the meetings and they start answering those questions as a team. So again, a question will be the web, one of the controls, web application firewall is a control, right? So the first question that you have to answer is, do you have the do you have the right people, processes, and procedures for maintaining these controls? And you can give yourself a score of 0 to 10 on that question, right? And so they have this meeting with their people, and then another people are replying to the CISO. Well, yeah, I think we have, or no, we don't, or yes, we do. If they say yes, we have that, then you as a CISO go, well, go ahead and explain to me then, who do we have for the web application firewall is, how many people do we have? Do they have the right certifications and experience? You start to have a really in-depth conversation about each of the controls. How in-depth, it all depends on what you want to do. Right. Once you finish with that first question, now you go to the next question. Well, do we have all the complete documentation for this control? Right? Do we have all the access to all the configurations? Do we have an updated network diagram? If the answer is yes, guess what the next question is going to be from the CISO, the follow-up? Show me. Right? Show me a network diagram. Jesus, this network diagram was updated 8 years ago. Right? So then you start to find that out. Once you answer those questions, you go to the next question. Do you conduct continuous performance monitoring and measurement on this control? Which means, have we established KPIs that we can measure against, right? And again, those of you listening to this will start to realize, wait a second, that's CMMI questions, as I said before, right? So they map to the CMMI level. And so the CISOs do this, and they spend like 1, 2, 3, 4 hours a day or whatever time answering these detailed questions to specific controls. At the end of 2 weeks, right, they have answered all the questions for all the controls. Now they know exactly where they are. So if one of the answers to the control is, has this control been deployed? Let's say multi-factor authentication, right? We get to the multi-factor. Has this control been deployed? The answer is no. Okay, then you move to the next control, because when you select no as an answer, it identifies multi-factor authentication as a gap. See what I'm saying? If the answer for multi-factor authentication is, I think that we did, right? That was a question about encryption. Encryption, I believe I have it as advanced. I forgot, so many controls now. But I was working with a local government in Australia, and we arrived at the control for encryption. Has encryption been deployed? And a lot of the CISOs from the different units of the government, they said yes, but a few of them said, I don't know where we are, right? So then we selected, we don't know, we'll come back to this later. So the system identifies the interesting controls that we need to go back. So, but you start to see how we start to create a really, really good detail assessment or picture of our current situation, how new CISOs can do it, because now you identify which controls you have in place, which controls are gaps, and which controls you're not too sure. Now, here's the cool thing, Tim. Those controls that you're not too sure, most probably will be somewhere between 3 to 4 controls. Now, as the CISO, you spend the time already with your people. Now you know if you have the right resources internally to do a full NIST CSS assessment / audit on those 4 controls. You no longer need to do a CSF assessment on hundreds of controls. Now you just do it on those 4 controls that you found interesting. You see how quickly you can turn around and get the information that you really, really need to start your strategy. Yeah. So with the government in Australia, we went back and we identified those controls that were interesting. And then we did an assessment on only 3 controls, a full type of audit following the ISO, whatever it is that they use over there. And within 3 weeks, we were able to come back, or 2 weeks, we were able to come back with a full result, with a recommendation, a roadmap that then can be presented to create a budget and so forth for the cybersecurity program. So that's a lot of use cases for RDI. And again, the original goal was identify controls to detect and mitigate ransomware attacks as early as possible. And it's turning out into a different type of very useful tool. Right? Where are we? If Black Basta comes out and we're a healthcare organization, how ready are we to deal with that, right? Because again, the CISO mitigations identifies a set of mitigations. We did the mapping of the mitigations to the RDI controls for you. That's already up there on the RDI Shield in our blogs. We already mapped what are the controls that you need to have in place to deal with Black Basta ransomware or with Akita ransomware. Now, you can take those controls and then do a self-assessment only for those specific controls, right? And
yeah. So on that, like, you've answered all my questions, by the way. That's what I love about getting with you, is you just I'm like, check. And even the NIST one, I actually had a question down about how you tie it to NIST, and you've already answered that. But I feel like too, this could be useful for insurance companies, like cyber insurance companies. So it could actually end up being on the other side of insurance companies of, they're asking you these questions, and then they're getting a number essentially on risk, and that's what insurance is, right? It's all about the risk and how much are they willing to accept risk, and people have to be at a certain maturity level for them to get coverage.
Exactly. So, and again, it's a lot of use for anyone, but yes, insurance companies. That is the common comment I get from everyone. You know who'd be interested in using this?
I was going to say, well, have you been reached out by an insurance company at all yet? Or?
No, because right now, even though the application is up and running, right? I know as the creator of this thing, I have the vision and I know what it can do, but I'm also hindered by the fact that I am not a programmer, right? So I have the ideas, then I depend on other people that I contract to create them. Now, you notice there's issues, as I mentioned, on the application. It works. It's just for some reason, some things are out of order. I don't know what the programmer did. And so I'm dependent on that group. And so what I see this going is not there yet, but it should be coming. Version 2.0 should be coming hopefully in July. It's a completely different look. It's the same. It does the same thing, but a little bit more intuitive. And then the future versions will have additional tools that will make things easier. And at that point, yes, that's when I will be ready to go to companies. Now, if there's anyone out there that's listening to this that would be interested in hearing more partnerships and so forth, absolutely, they can get to me through you or directly. Now, I know there's a lot of companies that are using it. I cannot tell you the logos, but I know a lot of companies are implementing this as part of their cybersecurity program.
Cool.
So
yeah, that's good to hear. It sounds really really useful. I've always been, and we've discussed this several times, right? Is metrics and having some of this, and I think this is a great way. It's free right now. I imagine I think you've mentioned paid at some point too. But like right.
But and we're not talking a lot of money.
Yeah,
it's just a token type of thing.
Yeah,
help.
But it's also right now better than nothing, which this has come in, and I mean, because you're tying it to like NIST and other other stuff, and this seems to be just, hey, well, like I said, if for any application security professionals, and this is what I did when I worked with the new development team. I took the OWASP and put it in and just interviewed them, and that in itself allows you to uncover stuff and identify what needs to be done, and kind of helps you build out a roadmap. So I think this is absolutely along those same lines. So
Yeah, and one thing, right? I used to work for one of the big fours, and everything that's on that application right now is what they charge you a lot of money for.
Yes. Yeah. No, I've seen. Yes. Yeah. You can either get someone, or you can go to RDIShield.com and get a free thing. What they're going to tell you. Yeah.
Exactly. But like I said, there's little tweaks, additional tools that I'm going to be providing. And as I said, it's I wish I were a programmer at this point. I wish I would be like typing away like crazy and creating these things. But
use AI, man. You everyone can be a developer now with AI.
Yeah. Playing with it. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Cool, man. Well, I'm looking forward to it, seeing how this kind of develops over the next several years. Thank you for joining me to discuss the Ransomware Defense Initiative, man.
Appreciate it. So hopefully, you can get a hold of me. Just visit the rdishield.com. There's a contact form. Send the email in there. There's an email address in there as well. So reachable there. And I'm on LinkedIn. I appreciate it, dude.
And that will do it. Hopefully you learned something. If you didn't, email me at timothy.dblock@exploresec.com or reach out to me on LinkedIn and let me know what you didn't learn, and we'll cover it in a future podcast. We'll see you next time, cybersecurity explorers.